Cheryl Swoopes, this is kind of what you get for kind of not jumping on the tide, jumping on the boat. You were supposed to go and elevate with this whole situation. Your broadcasting career, everything, Cheryl. Your podcasting, whatever you do, you're supposed to be elevating. But instead, you decided to show hate, very clear hate towards Caitlyn Clark. Very clear hate. Right? And now this is kind of like what you get for it.
She got fired, but it looked like you got fired, bro. It looked like she got fired. I just got to keep it real. It looked like she got fired.
I won't be missing you broadcasting the games because when you broadcasted the games, it was so hard for you to mention Caitlyn Clark. How are you up there talking about, you kept mentioning, oh, the Indiana Fever are doing this. Oh, Kelsey Mitchell and the Indiana Fever. Oh, Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell and those girls are doing. Oh, you had such the hardest time mentioning Caitlyn Clark's name. Why? I don't get it. I really don't know.
Did Cheryl Swoopes really think she could spread lies about Caitlyn Clark and keep her job in broadcasting? How could someone as legendary as Swoopes, a WNBA Hall of Famer, end up being removed from all broadcasts for the 2025 season? This wasn't just about one slip-up. This was a dramatic fall from grace that came after a year-long campaign against one of the WNBA's brightest stars, Caitlyn Clark. It all boils down to one central question. Did Swoopes seriously think she could tear down a player of Clark's caliber and escape the consequences? Cheryl Swoopes was once the face of women's basketball, a pioneering figure whose name was synonymous with the WNBA's early success. As one of the league's founding players, her legacy was cemented with accolades like 3 WNBA championships and an MVP award, making her one of the greatest players in the sport's history. Her transition from player to broadcaster seemed like a natural progression, with her experience and knowledge of the game making her a perfect fit for the role. But unfortunately, her broadcasting career was not as successful as her playing career. While fans expected her to use her platform to elevate women's basketball, Swoopes instead found herself embroiled in controversy after controversy. She began making increasingly negative and biased comments about Caitlyn Clark, a rising star in the WNBA. What started as small disagreements soon spiraled into a full-blown rivalry. Swoopes' comments became more frequent, increasingly inaccurate, and, most importantly, personal. Her bias against Clark was evident in her every broadcast. At first, these comments seemed like isolated incidents or offhand remarks, but they quickly snowballed into something far more damaging. Her growing disdain for Clark became a focal point, and it was clear that Swoopes wasn't just offering critique. She was actively trying to tear down a young athlete's reputation. This behavior alienated fans and made her seem out of touch with the game's evolving culture. What was once a promising post-career role for Swoopes had now turned into a major liability for her career, and soon, the WNBA took action. Her dismissal was not just the result of a single error in judgment. It was the culmination of a year-long campaign of negativity, misinformation, and refusal to adapt. Swoopes had failed to recognize that the world of basketball, especially women's basketball, was changing. What was acceptable in the past, where legends could get away with saying whatever they wanted, no longer held the same power. The WNBA wasn't going to let an icon of the sport tear down its future stars without consequences. Ironically, this wasn't even the first time Swoopes had found herself in hot water. Her previous firing as the head coach of Loyola University, following a mass exodus of players, demonstrated a consistent pattern of behavior. In coaching, just as in broadcasting, Swoopes' inability to build positive relationships and handle criticism had once again caught up with her. Cheryl Swoopes' war against Caitlyn Clark wasn't just a few offhand comments. This was a year-long campaign that revealed much about Swoopes' unwillingness to embrace the new era of women's basketball. Throughout the season, Swoopes used her platform to undermine Clark's success at nearly every turn. For instance, during a broadcast, Swoopes incorrectly claimed that Caitlyn Clark was in her 5th year of college, when in fact, Clark was a 4th-year player. This wasn't just a simple mistake. It was part of a growing trend where Swoopes failed to accurately acknowledge Clark's accomplishments. But it didn't stop there. Swoopes went on to claim that Clark was taking 40 shots per game, a fact that was wildly inaccurate. The actual number was far lower, about 22 shots per game. These weren't just minor mistakes, they were blatant distortions of reality. It quickly became clear that Swoopes was not reporting facts. She was trying to diminish Clark's achievements, perhaps in an attempt to assert her own relevance in a rapidly changing basketball landscape. As if these errors weren't enough, Swoopes went on to openly question the legitimacy of Clark's record-breaking feats. Swoopes was heard saying, "If you break a record in extra time, does it really count?" This comment was not only dismissive, but implied that Clark's achievements were somehow inferior because she had an additional year of eligibility. Swoopes' comments weren't just a critique. They were an attempt to delegitimize one of the most exciting young players the WNBA had ever seen. Swoopes' tone was equally troubling. Her disdain for Clark was evident in the way she spoke. She couldn't even bring herself to acknowledge Clark's skills without trying to belittle them. This passive-aggressive behavior didn't go unnoticed. Fans, analysts, and fellow commentators started to take notice of Swoopes' growing bias. At first, many thought it was just a one-off incident. But as the season continued, it became evident that this was part of a much larger pattern of negativity directed at Clark. Instead of offering insight or analysis, Swoopes was spending too much time focusing on discrediting Clark's achievements. This wasn't professional, it was personal. And it quickly became clear that Swoopes was not only failing to acknowledge Clark's impact on the game, but actively trying to undermine it. What had begun as minor criticisms turned into a full-blown campaign of misinformation, and the WNBA had no choice but to intervene. Swoopes' career was already marred by a controversial episode that preceded her time as a broadcaster. In 2016, she was fired as head coach of the Loyola University basketball team after the majority of her players left the program. Losing 10 out of 12 returning players in a single season isn't a standard turnover rate. It's a massive red flag. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was indicative of deeper problems within the program. Former players came forward with shocking allegations about the toxic environment Swoopes had created. They described a culture of fear and emotional manipulation, where Swoopes would belittle players, threaten to strip them of their scholarships, and even share personal information about them inappropriately. One player, Kate Sohn, described the environment as emotionally volatile. Swoopes would often cry during practices and games, creating a sense of unease and discomfort within the team. The environment wasn't one of mentorship and encouragement. It was one of intimidation and fear. These behaviors led to a mass exodus of players, and the program became a shell of its former self. The damage was done. Swoopes was fired, and Loyola University was forced to rebuild its basketball program from scratch. Fast forward to Swoopes' broadcasting career, and the same patterns of behavior began to surface. Her inability to adapt to criticism, her tendency to create drama, and her toxic attitude towards other players were all present in her role as a commentator. Instead of using her platform to support the next generation of women's basketball players, Swoopes became a barrier to the sport's growth. Just as her time at Loyola was characterized by dysfunction and negativity, her time in broadcasting was defined by personal grudges and an unwillingness to embrace change. It was clear that Swoopes had never learned from her past mistakes, and the WNBA wasn't about to let her repeat them on a national stage. The breaking point for Cheryl Swoopes came when two of basketball's most influential voices, Stephen A. Smith and Nancy Lieberman, publicly called her out for her treatment of Caitlyn Clark. Stephen A. Smith, known for his no-nonsense approach and massive media platform, didn't mince words. On national TV, he confronted Swoopes directly, asking, "Do you have any idea how that makes you look?" This wasn't just about basketball, it was a challenge to Swoopes' professionalism, credibility, and integrity. Smith's question wasn't just an opinion, it was a piercing critique that forced the public to see just how out of touch Swoopes had become. His words exposed the underlying issue that Swoopes had avoided for so long. Her personal bias against Clark was damaging not just to Clark's career, but to the WNBA's reputation as a whole. Stephen A. Smith's voice carried immense weight, and for him to publicly call out Swoopes meant that the issue was far bigger than just one commentator's opinion. But Smith wasn't alone. Nancy Lieberman, a former teammate and longtime colleague of Swoopes, also weighed in, taking her former friend to task over her increasingly erratic and inaccurate commentary about Clark. Lieberman's relationship with Swoopes wasn't just professional, it was personal, built on years of mutual respect in the basketball world. But after hearing Swoopes' comments on Clark, Lieberman reportedly reached out to confront her directly. Their conversation, however, didn't go as expected. The fallout from this confrontation was immense. Lieberman, who had long been seen as a supportive figure in the basketball community, became so disillusioned with Swoopes' behavior that she ended up replacing Swoopes as a commentator for the Dallas Wings. The situation was not only a professional blow for Swoopes, it was a devastating personal and professional implosion. The swift and public nature of this fallout sent shockwaves through the basketball community, highlighting just how quickly Swoopes had fallen from grace. This wasn't just about a few harsh words, it was about trust being broken in front of millions of viewers. Swoopes had made enemies in all the wrong places, and the consequences of her actions were now irreversible. After months of relentlessly criticizing Caitlyn Clark, Swoopes suddenly found herself in damage control mode. In an ironic twist, she appeared on ESPN to praise Clark, claiming how much stronger Clark had become in the off-season and gushing about the Indiana Fever's roster. It was as if the very person Swoopes had spent a year trying to discredit had suddenly won her approval. The shift was dramatic. 1 minute Swoopes was questioning Clark's legitimacy, and the next, she was touting her as one of the league's rising stars. This sudden reversal was not lost on fans, who were quick to point out how insincere it seemed. Social media exploded with skepticism, as fans and analysts mocked Swoopes for her flip-flop. The basketball world wasn't buying this change of heart. It seemed like nothing more than a transparent attempt to salvage her damaged reputation after months of negative press. The timing of this reversal only made matters worse. It was clear that Swoopes wasn't praising Clark out of newfound admiration, but because she realized that continuing her anti-Clark narrative would only worsen her public image. Basketball pundits like Stephen A. Smith didn't let her off the hook either. Smith, ever the critic, pointed out how suspicious it was that Swoopes had waited so long to show support for Clark, considering how much she had ignored and dismissed her accomplishments in the past. The damage Swoopes had done to her credibility was irreparable, and no amount of praise for Clark could erase the months of negative commentary. This sudden shift in tone only intensified the firestorm surrounding her. Fans saw it for what it was, an attempt to save face in the wake of her own self-inflicted downfall. Swoopes' credibility had been compromised, and the public wasn't fooled by her sudden support of Clark. The damage to her professional reputation was permanent, and the clock was ticking on her broadcasting career. The final blow came swiftly. The WNBA, after months of controversy and public fallout, made the decisive move to remove Cheryl Swoopes from all broadcasts for the 2025 season. This wasn't just about her treatment of Caitlyn Clark. It was about a sustained pattern of negativity, misrepresentation, and a complete disregard for professionalism. The WNBA, which had seen exponential growth in viewership and fan engagement, could no longer afford to keep someone in such a prominent position who was actively damaging the league's reputation. Swoopes had become the liability, not just in her biased commentary, but in her failure to adapt to the changing landscape of the sport. Women's basketball had evolved, with younger stars like Caitlyn Clark leading the charge. The league needed voices that could celebrate this new era, not undermine it. Swoopes' refusal to embrace this shift, combined with her consistently negative and inaccurate commentary, made it clear that she no longer had a place in the WNBA's future. The decision to remove Swoopes wasn't just about one player, it was about protecting the integrity of the league. It was a clear message from the WNBA. The league was moving forward, and it would no longer tolerate voices that actively sought to tear down its rising stars. By removing Swoopes from all broadcasts, the league was prioritizing growth and inclusivity over protecting a former legend who had become a hindrance to the sport's future. This decision wasn't just a professional setback for Swoopes, it was a public statement that the WNBA was committed to moving past the old guard of basketball commentary and embracing a new era. The league had made its choice, and it was clear Cheryl Swoopes' time had come to an end. While Swoopes floundered in damage control, the Indiana Fever were quietly building something special, something that had the potential to shake the very foundation of the WNBA. At the heart of this transformation was Caitlyn Clark, the very player Swoopes had spent months criticizing. Clark was no longer just a promising talent. She was now the centerpiece of a team poised for greatness. The Fever's management, recognizing Clark's immense potential, made strategic moves to elevate the team's roster. They added veteran players like Natasha Howard and Dana Bonner, both former champions with extensive playoff experience. These acquisitions weren't just about filling gaps. They were about taking the Fever from being a good team to a great one. Howard, a former Defensive Player of the Year, brought much-needed defensive presence to the team, while Bonner, despite being in the twilight of her career, remained a force on both ends of the floor. Together with Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell, the Fever now had a perfect blend of youth, energy, and championship experience. This roster was designed for long-term success, with the talent to challenge even the league's top contenders. What made this transformation even more impressive was the way the Fever's management had orchestrated it. The team wasn't just focused on short-term gains. They were building a team that could contend for championships for years to come. Clark, Boston, Mitchell, and the rest of the young core were complemented perfectly by Howard and Bonner's leadership. This balance of youth and experience gave the Fever the edge they needed to compete with the best. The WNBA was taking notice, and it was clear that the Fever were no longer just a team with potential. They were a legitimate championship contender. While Swoopes spent her time undermining Clark, the Fever were rising to the occasion. Their ability to build a cohesive, championship-worthy roster while Swoopes floundered in damage control showed the difference between embracing change and clinging to the past. The Fever were a team on the rise, and as Swoopes' career crumbled, they were positioning themselves for greatness. As we look ahead to the 2025 season, the contrast between Cheryl Swoopes' downfall and the Indiana Fever's rise couldn't be clearer. Swoopes, once a legend, is now out of the picture, while Caitlyn Clark and the Fever are poised for greatness. It's a story of redemption for the Fever and a cautionary tale for Swoopes. In the world of sports, lifting others up is what truly makes a legend. When you tear others down, eventually, you'll find yourself left behind. Let us know what you think about Swoopes' firing and her relationship with Caitlyn Clark. Do you think the WNBA made the right decision? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.